So I'm going to start sharing my screen. There's a little disability awareness quiz that I'd love for you to take a look at. And if you have a piece of paper, you can give yourself a point for each one of the 15 statements that is true for you. It's just a way, it comes from Amy Kenny's book,
Mhm.
and it's a way of just measuring, our awareness. Let's see. And I'm just now opening the chat. So I'm just now seeing your messages, Emily. Um, your audio is working okay now? No,
Can you hear me?
I can.
Okay, then it is great.
Okay. All
So
right.
Bethany, my husband and I were married on Vinyl Haven Island.
Oh my goodness.
So yes, I want to let everyone know that this session today is dedicated to Charles Funk, who is Emily's husband, who passed away 1 month ago.
Oh, sorry.
I'm sorry.
Mm.
All right, so I'm going to share, and I'm going to ask you to give me a thumbs up that you can actually see the slides. And then I'm going to probably mute everybody for a bit until we are going to have a chance to respond to questions through the chat. I'm going to be reading those responses so that it's equally accessible to everybody here.
Mm.
Um, but I will not be unmuting people until the question and answer session at the end. Are there any questions before I mute everyone? Oh, and are you seeing the slides?
Yes.
Yes.
Excellent. All right. So now I am muting everybody. You will not have the ability to unmute yourself until the end, and then I will change that setting. All right. Everyone should be muted at this point. So people are still coming in. Welcome. You should be seeing a slide of a disability awareness quiz, which comes from Amy Kenny's book, My Body is Not a Prayer Request. You can give yourself a point for each of the 15 statements, which is true for you. It just gives us a sense. It's not something I'm going to ask you to share with anybody else, but it just helps you to have a sense of your awareness of the ableism in the world. So go ahead and take a look at that while we welcome a few more people and I figure out again how to see you and present at the same time. Why is it the participant thing at the bottom? Zoom, I love you so much. Ah, there it is. All right. So if you could, I'd love to know more about who is here today. Um, we've already asked a bunch of you where you're from, and I know we have people from Maine and Massachusetts and Rhode Island. I'd love to know if you identify as disabled or temporarily able-bodied. I'd love to know if you identify as United Methodist or some other faith. If you're a faith leader, whether that's as clergy or in your church. So feel free to type that in the chat and I will read those chats out loud so that everything is accessible to everybody here. And then we will start talking a little bit more. I'll introduce Jerry and I. We are the co-presenters today. We will watch a little video about Amy Kenny's material so that we'll all kind of be on the same page, whether we've read the book or not. And after that, we will dive in a little bit further into how to have less ableist ways of thinking, especially about scripture. And we'll have some ideas about how churches can become more inclusive. And finally, um, at the end, there will be a chance for question and answer. So that's kind of where we're headed today. So if you've not had a chance, you can take a look at the disability awareness quiz and just get a sense for yourself. If you are aware of how ableism affects people with disabilities, you can give yourself a point for each of the statements that's true for you. All right. Thank you for sharing where you're from. I see some folks at Jerry says, I have a disability, but I don't think of myself as disabled. Robin says, I am disabled. I am a leader in the Methodist Church. John and Jill from East Greenwich, Rhode Island, United Methodist Church. Tom says, I'm a United Methodist pastor from Salisbury and identify as abled. Sharon says, I am a disabled person, above the knee amputee, and use a wheelchair. I am UMC clergy and on medical leave. I live in Bloomington, Indiana. Joe says, I'm clergy in the United Methodist faith tradition. My ministry has been transitioned from pastoring a church to spiritual care chaplain at Holyoke Medical Center. I am not disabled. Lanny says, I am Lanny, the treasurer of the Community United Methodist Church at Crystal Lake, Ellington, Connecticut. I am not disabled. Thanks, everybody, for sharing. All right, so let's keep going. So we're going to start with a meditation written by Becca Anderson. You can see an image of her here. Becca is a friend, and she uses she and her pronouns. She's a queer and disabled writer, activist, and theologian who earned her master's from Union Theological Seminary. She serves as a part-time director of pastoral care and community connections for the Julian Way, which is a wonderful ministry. It's online, but it's been started by a United Methodist pastor in Texas. And it's a ministry offering spiritual care to people with disabilities. She's also a member of Discernment with the Farmington Valley Association with the Southern New England United, oh, I'm going to get this wrong, basically the conference equivalent in the UCC in Southern New England, and she lives in Northampton. So get yourself a chance to kind of take a deep breath. You could close your eyes if you'd like and enjoy this meditation from Becca. Imagine the body of God. Imagine it with all the genders and races and physical descriptions of the world. God is male and female, and both, and neither, and all. God is black and red and olive and tan. God wears flowing dresses and blue jeans and saris and turbans and tuxedos and lots of jewelry. God has tattoos of every animal in the world and a single heart-shaped stud in their right ear. And God has every ability and every disability in the world. God walks, God limps, God rolls, God crawls. God gets where God needs to be, gets to us however God can. God paints with their feet and reads with their hands. God can sing by making noises that are not words, yet expresses emotions that words cannot. God is too busy reaching out to us to be concerned that they cannot see. God is too busy feeling the rhythms of music to worry about what it sounds like. Is it any wonder that we have trouble grasping God when God does not move the way we expect a body to move? Is it any wonder we have trouble understanding God when God speaks with the slurred speech of cerebral palsy? Is it any wonder that we cannot comprehend God, who bears the chronic pain of the suffering of the world? How can we become closer to this being beyond our comprehension, this body-mind that meets none of our expectations? By freeing us from expectations. By searching for God in the unique body-minds of our fellow human beings. By seeking to understand that which challenges us, confuses us, and frightens us. By accepting ourselves and the body minds that make us who we are. When we pray that all of this may be so, when we pray to love all bodies and minds, when we pray to be both broken and whole at once, we are praying to be more like God. Amen. Okay. I hope that has brought you into a learning space and a worshiping space, for all that we do is worship. I want to introduce myself. I'm Melissa, and I'm a white woman in my 50s with short brownish grayish hair who wears very cool striped glasses. I have a gap between my two front teeth that I love despite having worn braces as a kid. And I'm a member of the Committee on Disability for the New England Annual Conference of the United Methodist Church. I'm ordained in the UMC, but I've worked in a UCC church called West Concord Union Church since 2014. At WCUC, I pastor Sunday Fellowship, which is a 40-year-old ministry of worship and friendship for people of all abilities. And on a more personal note, I have ADHD, and so does my husband and all three of my kids. I often feel disabled because medication and hard work aren't enough to make my brain work the way that most people expect an adult brain to work. I'm very thankful to God that I found a ministry where that's a plus instead of a minus. And I also love to crochet. I made this. Sing and walk in the woods with my dogs. I'd also like to introduce my co-presenter, and I'm now not finding your bio, Jerry. Is my bad. Maybe that's where that blank. Jerry, I'm so sorry. Let me see if I can fix this. If you guys can be patient with my brain for a minute. How I missed that. I have it in my email. So I want to, while I'm looking for this, I can just thank everybody who's here today for coming and remind you that we're dedicating this session to Charles Funk, who is Emily Funk's husband. Emily is also a member of the Committee on Disability, along with Jerry and I, and there are several other members who are here today, and Emily's husband passed away about a month ago. So John Vitko is here, Denise Ranger is here from the committee, Emily Funk is here. Did I miss anybody else who's here from our committee? Okay. All right. So I want to introduce Jerry Barrier, who's here to co-present today and tell some of his own story. He, after 18 years in human resources with Verizon, Jerry worked in the field of assistive technology for 20 years. Over 20 years. And he spent 6 years as an assistant manager at the Verizon Center for customers with disabilities, followed by 7 years as an assistive technology consultant, specializing in work with deaf-blind consumers. Most recently, he ended a 9-year stint at the Perkins School for the Blind in the field of assistive technology and retired from full-time employment in June of 2021. Jerry is past president of the Bay State Council of the Blind and is currently co-chair of that organization's advocacy committee. His interests include audio production, accessible web design, and birding by ear. He has consulted on numerous accessibility projects with the Massachusetts Audubon Society, including more than 15 all-persons trails projects. He has conducted birding by ear workshops and nature walks, both for the blind and sighted audiences of all ages. Right. So I want to start with the question. This comes from the title of an article written by John Hull. He acquired blindness later in life and wrote this article, Could a Blind Person Be a Disciple of Jesus. After having had his perspective changed, after acquiring blindness, wondering after reading all these healing stories about blindness being healed by Jesus, could he have been included as a disciple of Jesus? And more personally, I just want to share that, this is tough stuff. This is courageous stuff. I'm so glad that you're here today because you want to learn more about this. I want to explain that, I know that ableism is a part of me. I'm not ashamed. I know that I would say things like, I'm not ashamed of um, saying that I take medication for ADHD and anxiety and depression. And then in this next sentence, I would say, all right, everyone, let's all stand and sing together, guide my feet while I run this race. And I would be completely unaware of the ableism in my own language and choices of songs for my group of people with lots of mobility challenges and lots of disabilities. I would be unaware of the ableism in my own speech. I also show you this photo of a woman in a green wheelchair who's being pulled up a set of 10 stairs. That was the closest thing I could find to the mobility device in my first church that I served. And it was called a stair climber. And basically, you had to strap someone, it looked like a stretcher, but it had the ability to climb the stairs. And it made the person's feet go way up above their head. And it never occurred to me that this was not really a good solution. Later on, we did build an elevator into the building and also an accessible pastor's office so that I wasn't inaccessible to people with disabilities. But it took years to get to that point. I just cannot imagine strapping someone into that contraption and using that. So even though, I now identify as a person with a disability, I know that ableism still can pervade my thinking and sometimes my leadership. So, while we're here today, let's have some grace for ourselves and for one another. We are learning here, and that's what matters the most is the learning. So I want to invite Jerry to share more personally about his own journey in life and in faith. And so, Jerry, just give me a second to make sure you're unmuted. And let's see here.
I think I can unmute myself.
Okay.
Am I unmuted?
Yes, we hear you.
Okay. Okay. Hi,
Okay.
everybody. It's great to be here. And I actually thought of a situation where I did something that was almost ableism and I stopped myself. So I want to begin by telling that. I was working as a tech trainer with a woman who is totally blind and has only control of her head. She does not have good control of any other part of her body. She can speak, not well, but she can speak. And she moves her head to the left and it sends dashes to a Morse code device. She moves her head to the right and it sends dots. And by learning Morse code, she was able to learn how to open her email. She can hear, so she would use the screen reader called JAWS that I use. She would open her email and listen to it. And one day I was there working with her, and I loved that working with this lady. It was really just, it was inspiring to me. But she said to me, I want to learn how to delete a message. And I thought, oh my gosh, this is not going to be easy because she can't use her keyboard. So it's all done by moving her head. And I almost said, this is probably going to be more than you really want to get into. Why don't I just delete it for you? But instead of doing that, for once, I was thinking on my feet, so to speak, to make an ableist comment. And I said, here's the deal. I can delete it for you in 10 seconds, or I can teach you how to do it, and it might take you 10 minutes to do it. And I said, which would you prefer? And she said, I want to do it. And I got a big smile in my heart and on my face, and I taught her how to do it. And it did take her a long time to do things like that, but she did them. And I was really inspired by that. Anyway, I am totally blind from birth from something called retinopathy of prematurity, which involved being in an incubator after I was born, and the oxygen that was used damaged my retinas. I have a twin brother, and he was not affected at all by it. We're 73 now, and he still has good sight. There was no negligence involved. Everybody always wants to ask me, did your parents sue the doctors? No, nobody sued the doctors. Nobody blamed God for it. It wasn't God that caused it. It was caused by doctors trying to keep me and my twin brother alive by blasting oxygen into the incubator. And it kept us alive, but it blinded me and it blinded every kid in my class when I was a little boy at a school for blind children. They were all blind for the same reason, because doctors did not know what was causing the blindness of these premature babies. But a year after I was born, somebody came to the conclusion, and they found ways of thwarting it if it ever happens to someone. So it doesn't really happen much anymore. They were doing the best they knew how to do. Why am I blind and my twin brother is not? I think it's just by chance. It just happened that way. Maybe I was looking toward or turned toward the oxygen inlet. Who knows? But it's not a question that's worth me spending very much time on. It just is. I want to talk about a couple of skills that I learned that I consider the most valuable of all the skills I've ever learned. There are three of them from my childhood. One was Braille, which I use every single day. The second one was learning how to type on a regular typewriter. I learned on an old office model typewriter when I was in fifth grade. And of course, I couldn't read back what I typed. I couldn't even tell if I had it set on stencil. If anybody's as old as I am on here, they may know what that is. But I learned to type, and I somehow realized at that age, this is going to be a key to my independence and success in life. And it really has been, because I wouldn't be able to use a computer as adeptly as I do if it weren't for good typing skills. I became a really good typist by the end of seventh grade, and I loved it. I liked the sound of the typewriter, the smell of them, everything about them. As an adult, the things that have impacted my life the most in the way of technology have been the personal computer and the iPhone. They are both absolutely magnificent devices. There are some things I can't do on them, but for the most part, I can use them. On my iPhone, and I am totally blind, I can order stuff from Amazon. I can check my Google Calendar. I can do email, texting, all that kind of stuff. I'm not going to say it's easy. It took me maybe a month or two to get to the point where I didn't want to throw it out the window every time I tried to use it. But it's a beautiful thing. And I just want to say that technology in general has absolutely changed my life. I can do things today with ease and do them well that I could not touch before technology became available. Despite that, the unemployment rate among people with disabilities in general is about 70%. And it was that way back when I was trying to get my first job in 1974. It took me a year to get a job. And my first one was, and bear in mind, I was 22 at the time, I got a job with an Association for the Blind as a counselor to work with people who either were losing or had lost their sight in the ages of 50 to 60 years old. And here I am, this young kid, trying to talk to them. But I loved that job. And if it paid me a lot more money than it did, I probably would have stayed with it the rest of my life. But I had a family to support, and I took the opportunity to move on to Verizon. But I did that first job for 4 years, and I loved it. And I actually think I did pretty well at it. I talked to people about how I did things and how I felt about being blind and that sort of thing, and it worked out well. At Verizon, when I first started, I was hired due to some sort of a government initiative that required major companies to hire somebody who's blind. They were trying to decrease the unemployment rate. And I got in there, as an interviewer. I eventually became a full interviewer and interviewed for every type of job, including management positions, linemen, all that sort of thing. But at first, I was doing just simple screening interviews, and somebody else in my group had to take what I typed up on the typewriter, and they had to transfer my information and probably sometimes correct the errors in it. And I remember one particular guy really resented me. He didn't think I should have been hired. He didn't think I should be there. And that made it kind of tough for me at first. But I proved myself over the years and did well at it and enjoyed it. I think I was a good interviewer. I do think I missed things by not being able to see people, but I did the best I could to make up for it by being a good listener and hearing the tone of their voice and that sort of thing. I eventually got transferred to Massachusetts and worked at the Verizon Center for Customers with Disabilities. And I worked there with 3 deaf people along with other non-disabled people. And I remember thinking, my gosh, I'm from a different planet than these deaf people. I don't know how this is ever going to work. And they resented me also. 2 of them went to the boss. She told me this later as I got to know her, and said that those deaf guys said, look, if you think we're going to drive that blind guy around all the time, you got another thing coming, because we're not going to do it. But I became friends with them, and they found out what I was good at. And some of the things I was really good at, like the technology stuff, they weren't good at. So we made a good team and had a good time working together. I did that for 6 years, and I specialized in working on equipment that was used to enable deaf blind people to use a Braille device that worked with a TTY so that they could communicate. And I liked that too. I loved it. And I learned a lot about working with deafblind people. Before that, I had never actually worked in my career at Verizon. I didn't work with people with disabilities up to that point. But I loved it and did well at it, and was very happy. And my job was going to end at this one particular point, and I took a buyout along with a lot of other people and left the company and retired for about 3 months and realized that wasn't going to work for me. So I got back into the business of working, and I'm actually still working even though I'm fully retired now. My first wife died in 2016 after 42 years of marriage. And I ended up getting married again in 2018, and I'm about to celebrate our 7th anniversary. And I have 2 children, 2 biological children, and one that I acquired when I got remarried. 5 grandchildren, 2 great grandchildren, and my family mostly likes me most of the time, I think. And it's been wonderful to be able to be a parent. At my age now, the idea of being a parent would be very daunting to me, but that when I was younger, it wasn't. I want to give you some of my thoughts about disabilities and about blindness. And bear in mind, I'm only speaking for myself here. I don't agree fully with Amy Kenny on some of the things that she says in her book, but I'll give you, my take on some of these things. One of the worst parts about having a disability is when it isolates us from socializing and contributing to society. That is an awful thing. And being blind definitely isolates me at times. People can't make eye contact with me, so in many cases, they'll just pass me by. My neighbors never speak to me, and I've lived here for 6 years, and they don't ever speak to me. If my wife is with me, they'll say hello, and she'll say hi, and I always say hi also, but they don't reach out to me in any way when I'm by myself. And I don't want to say I resent that, but I regret it. But it occurred to me just the other day, after living here for 6 years, that when I moved in here, why didn't I invite them to come for a visit with us to socialize a little bit and get to know me? And I could have even been honest with them and say, I want to get to know you because I'm hoping that you'll speak to me and interact with me, and when you see me go by and so on. But I didn't do it. So I bear some of the responsibility for that. I cannot smile on command because I've never been able to look in a mirror. I certainly smile when I feel like smiling, but if you say smile, I don't know what to do. I really don't. It doesn't mean that I'm unhappy, doesn't mean I'm cranky, or doesn't mean I'm dull either. We're not all the same. I know that. I've failed at lots of things that I've tried to do. You know, when I was a kid, my dad used to say, Jerry can do anything anybody else can do except drive. And he even did that once when somebody let me feel the steering wheel as they were driving. But, you know, I believed that I could do anything. And I couldn't have been more wrong. I've failed at hundreds of things dismally, but I've also succeeded at things that I never even knew I could do. I never had any idea I could do them. So that's been a wonderful experience in general. I no longer think that I can do anything you can do. I know that I can do what I can do with my particular skill set, my particular deficits, and so on. But I don't even try to pretend that I can do everything you can do. And I certainly don't try to pretend that I can do what a sighted person in general can do. I also don't expect everybody to understand me. I don't expect people to say the politically correct words at times. I'll never forget a woman one time when I was walking down the street. She sounded like she might have been old enough to be my great grandmother. And she said, I guess it looked like I was kind of struggling. And she said, Hey, blind boy, where are you trying to go? Do you need help? And I just thought that was the cutest thing I had ever heard. I thought there was no fear. She wasn't worrying about offending me. She saw me there and saw that I was a blind guy, even though I was 30 years old. She considered me a boy, and she wanted to help me. And I just thought that was beautiful. I loved it. She treated me exactly the way I would like to be treated, and I like that. I educate people when I can if I think it's a reasonable opportunity. I am not the center of the universe just because I happen to have a disability, and I honestly do not expect the world always to bend. I don't care whether you use the word see and look and all that. Some of my blind friends talk about watching a movie last night. I find that kind of strange, but I don't do it myself, but I don't mind it. And I certainly don't mind people using words that remind me that I'm blind. I already know I'm blind. I've been blind all my life. I'm not sensitive about it. It's just part of who I am. And I'm quite comfortable with it, actually. I want to move on here because I know I'm running out of time. I want to talk about church a little bit. It helped me to have a sighted twin because we went to church together and he often would guide me. And I honestly don't think he ever resented having to assist me. We got along well, except when we were teenagers, of course, and we still get along well. We auditioned for the church choir, the children's choir, when we were 10 years old, and we got rejected. I think there was some ableism involved there. I think the choir director just decided, oh, that kid's not going to be able to manage not being able to see. But I'm here to tell you that I've been singing in adult choirs ever since I became an adult, and haven't gotten thrown out of one ever since then. I'm not a great singer, and I get worse as I get older, but I do sing okay. My choir directors have always been willing to get the words to me in whatever way they could, and it works out well. My church bought me a Braille Bible when I was a kid. It was 18 big, huge, thick volumes. And later on, the church got a hymnal that was 7 volumes. So what's 18 plus 7? I don't know, 26 or something like that. That's how many big, thick volumes I had to deal with. When I used to sing in church, they would figure out which hymns we were singing on a Sunday, and somebody would always be assigned to bring me the 2 or 3 volumes that I needed for those hymns, and I'd sing them, and then they'd come back and put them away. Today, if any of you are familiar with an SD card that you plug into a device, that will easily hold the full Bible, maybe two or three versions of the Bible, and that 7-volume hymnal with plenty of room to spare for other things. So things have come a long way since then. I experienced very little discrimination in the church. And I want to say that I know that ableism is real. I know that I've participated in it at times. It's just one of those things. Sometimes out of convenience, we say things and do things that are not appropriate. But I want to emphasize that I believe most ableism is not done out of malice. It's done out of not knowing any better or not knowing how to do better. I try to pick my battles. I do fight for legislation that affects people who are blind. I'm co-chair of the advocacy committee with the Bay State Council of the Blind. And I do lots of things like that, but I do pick my own battles. Helen Keller one time said that life is either an adventure or it's nothing. And I've tried to make mine an adventure, and I've succeeded at that pretty well, I think, thanks to people who have supported me, including my parents and people that I've been employed by and so on. Sometimes people ask me, am I unhappy because I'm blind? No, I'm not. If I'm unhappy, it's due to other things going on. It could be due to anything, strife in my family, things like that. But no, I'm not. I honestly don't think I've ever been depressed a day in my life. It certainly hasn't been because I'm blind. My disability does not define who I am. It's one part of me, and it does create some darn difficult challenges at times, but it is not who I am. I live a fulfilling life. I have a family that, as I said earlier, loves me most of the time. And I have a lot of friends that I communicate with and work along with on various projects that I get involved in. I'm busy all the time. What could the church do for people with disabilities? I thought about that a little bit. The first thing is if you have someone with a disability in your congregation, interact with them. However you have to do it, find a way to interact with them. Don't just pass them by. The other thing I think that can be helpful is to train your church staffs in disability etiquette. Find a good workshop that you outline that you can use. And if there are people with disabilities in your congregation, if possible, get them involved in this training and let them be a part of it. Find ways to make your building more physically accessible. And I'm not talking about one of those old stair climbers. I mean, find ways to actually add accessibility to your building. Find ways to involve people in your congregation into church activities and also in the church leadership if possible. More than anything else, treat people with disabilities exactly as you would like to be treated were you in their situation. And that is all I have to say. And I don't know how long I went on, but I'm done.
Thank you so much, Jerry. That was amazing. I didn't keep track of your time either, but I think
Good.
I looked at everyone who's watching and they're wrapped with attention. So you did a great job, and thank you so much for sharing so personally with us. All right, I'm going to start sharing the slides again. Bear with me while I figure it out. All right, are you seeing the slides, guys? I'm hoping that's a yes. Since we started, I want to read out a couple more people had introduced themselves over the chat. So Bethany Fontaine had said, I'm a United Methodist lay leader. I have a hidden disability that is not obvious to others, but still requires accommodations. And I believe Emily Funk said beautiful in response to the meditation that we read. And John and Jill wrote Robin. I'm not sure what that's about. And Denise Ranger said, I'm Denise. My daughter and I are disabled. We live in Maine. I'm a certified lay minister at my church, assigned by my DS to raise awareness and care for people with disabilities, and the co-chair of the New England Annual Conference Disability Committee. All right, let's keep going. Oops. Okay. So let's dive into Amy Kenny's book, My Body is Not a Prayer Request. Dr. Amy Kenny, who uses she, her pronouns, is a disabled scholar, practitioner, and writer and advocate. She serves as the inaugural director of the Disability Cultural Center, and her work on disability has been featured in lots of publications like Teen Vogue, HuffPost, The Mighty, Sojourners, and Shondaland. Her award-winning book mixes humor, personal narratives, and theology to invite faith communities to rethink their ableism and learn from the embodied wisdom of disabled people. In addition to her academic work, Kenny has served on the mayor's Equity, Diversity, and Inclusion Task Force as a facilitator and as a facilitator for Freedom Road Institute for Leadership and Justice, while co-leading a mutual aid group supporting neighbors experiencing homelessness for several years. She co-founded Jubilee Homes, OC, a permanent supportive housing initiative in her community. She is originally from Brisbane, Australia. You'll hear her accent. And she is at home in the water, where she'd always much rather be. So we're going to watch a video now. I did a sound check, so you should be able to hear the audio with no problem. And just forgive me, I'm going to play quite a bit of this. Let's see, I want to go down to 3 minutes and 40 seconds. And so I'm going to play until 11 minutes. So it is a chunk of time, but she is pretty articulate, and I think you'll enjoy the video.
Well, thank you. Hi, everyone. Thank you for coming. Thank you for hosting me here. It's a delight to be with you. I'll start just with a quick image description for access. I'm a disabled white woman in my 30s with shoulder-length, straight, blondish hair. I'm wearing a black dress with colorful lightning bolts on it, so you know that I'm fun. And I'm sitting in my black and blue mobility scooter named Diana, Princess of the Mascoutra, named after Wonder Woman, complete with bedazzled Wonder Woman W on the front. No, it's not for Weezer, as I am sometimes asked. You might have noticed that I'm physically disabled. I say disabled, or what we call identity-first language, to describe myself, really just to reclaim the word, and that I'm not ashamed to be disabled. Some folks use person-first language, such as people with disabilities, or person who lives with a disability. It's not my roommate, so I say I am disabled. And there are, of course, other ways to describe disability: special needs, differently abled, or my personal favorite, handy-capable. All of which feel like euphemisms, like you're afraid to say the word. I'm not ashamed of my disabled body, so there's no need for whispers or euphemisms. My needs aren't special, they're just human. I'm disabled, unapologetically, unashamed to be disabled. And I start there because usually when people meet me, they reveal the ways that my disabled body makes them uncomfortable. Strangers and soon-to-be strangers approach me at the library, in parking lots and at the grocery store, with potions and prayers to make me not disabled, trying to fix what is not broken, giving me advice no one asked for. I've received everything from put garlic in your socks, to try to relax, to hit your leg with a hammer. To get rid of my disability, somehow I'm still disabled. When people meet me, they want to comment on my disability. And usually this takes about 2 minutes. 2 minutes of time where folks have to share with me how uncomfortable my body makes them feel. Now, people are well-meaning, and I think this comes from a good place, but over time, patterns emerge with the way that people engage with me about my disabled body. And so for our time together today, I'm going to share my top 5 taglines, I call them, that strangers say to me about being disabled. And I have a story for each of them. So here are the top 5 taglines that strangers say to me. 5, you'd be healed if you just believe. Yeah, thanks. 4, I don't even think of you as disabled. Thank you. 3, you're such an inspiration. 2, you'll be healed in heaven. And 1, I'd rather die than be disabled. Cringe. So I've got a story for each, so you can kind of time how long we've been together by which number I'm on, if you find one story boring, and come back in at a different time. So, number 5. 5th most popular tagline, people say to me about being disabled, "You'll be healed if you just believe." God told me to pray for you, she says. Her words linger like a cloying perfume in a claustrophobic space. God wants to heal you. She is undoubtedly thrilled with herself. I've been here before. It never ends well. This woman does not know me. She doesn't have the intimacy that prayer or accountability or sarcasm require. She simply interprets my disabled body as something that requires fixing and ropes God into her ableism. Internally, I make a swift calculation: endure the prayer to avoid squabble, or call her out on her benevolent eugenics and be branded a heretic again. I used to play the game, eavesdropping as they prayed for my broken body, concealing my spasms lest they be confused for demonic convulsions. I thought, if I could just assume a veneer of piety, it would inoculate me against their patronizing prayers and invasive interrogations. I believed I could perfect my way out of people demeaning disability, that somehow my patience would endow me with enough worth in their minds to be considered fully human. Spoiler, it didn't. All it did was put me on a carousel of dehumanization that made me feel complicit in their toxic theology. So I choose door B. I don't need prayer for healing. My body has already been sanctified and redeemed. I choke out. I know it won't be enough, but my dignity is not up for debate, especially here in God's house. Only a second has passed, but there is a lifetime between us. Bewildered, she blocks my path, grabbing my forearm so I can't leave until I suffer her pontification. You need to hear that God wants to heal you. You would be healed if you just believe. If you stopped resisting, you would be free already. Free. All I want to be free from is her. All I need to be liberated from is the notion that disability is inherently deviant and in need of eradication. I am the embodiment of her worst-case scenario because I don't need her to rescue me. I am what every athlete fears and what pregnant parents dread. I am the catalyst for losing faith and questioning God. Theodicy runs through my veins. I am every villain in every superhero movie ever made. People call my murderers merciful because I am a burden and a drain and a waste. I am disabled. Or at least that's what they tell me. I've heard some version of this story my whole life. If it's not from well-meaning, prayerful perpetrators, it's from movies or teachers or doctors. But the worst of it comes from the church. It's no wonder that many of our churches have absorbed this core spiritual lie known as ableism, discrimination against disabled folks, when the landmark legislation that provided civil rights for disabled people in the United States is something that some Christian communities fought against. Alongside chanting, "Come just as you are," and blasting WWJD on every bracelet, mug, and t-shirt, remember those days? Many Christian spaces fought to exclude disabled people.
Okay, I'm going to stop the video there. So I would love for you to type in the chat anything that you heard in that video that was new to you or something that grabbed your attention, something that's helpful for you. Feel free to share in the chat your reactions to the video. I did it this way so that even if you haven't read the book, we could all kind of be on the same page, so to speak, by listening to some of the material in the video. But I really encourage you to read the whole book. And I do have some free copies for those who registered for in-person work. I had promised that the first people who registered could get free copies, and I'll be sending those out to the 3 people who registered to be in person. But if you yourself would really like and benefit from a copy, please send me your address and I'll see if I can make that happen. So let's dive into Amy Kenny's work. Here you see a slide, which she has lots of top tens in her book after each chapter, and we don't have time to go into all of the great work in her book. But I thought we might start with the top 10 reasons I'm disabled, because these are the things that she's heard from prayerful perpetrators, which is what she talks about when what she calls people that have approached her with very ableist thinking and language. Um, and what I want to sort of point out are the theological underpinnings to behavior. And that's sort of my hope, is that today we can undermine the ableist theology that still floats around in lots and lots of churches, including United Methodist churches. I will tell you that in my work with people with disabilities, I've heard these stories like what Amy shared about the prayerful perpetrator wanting to, telling her that if she only believed, she would be healed. Every person I know with a disability has a story like that. So yes, we have made a lot of progress in the world toward becoming more accessible. The ADA is, and she goes on to say this in the video, the ADA was it was incredibly important, and it only works when it's enforced, which it isn't always. So it's not everything. And did we know that the church actually fought it? So that is not necessarily all church leaders, but church leaders fought the ADA, and that is not a good look. And between that and some of the theology and some of the ways that we read scripture, we do in the church have some of the worst offenders, and some of the most difficult experiences for people with disabilities. And it's essential as church leaders that we know that, and we work on trying to become less ableist ourselves, and to do the kind of teaching within our congregations, and also to change our practices. I mean, the people that I work with are usually developmentally disabled or intellectually disabled. Many times they have multiple disabilities. And I can tell you that their experience in the congregation, in the church, is often being passed by, not having leadership opportunities, not being welcomed, being told to sit in a certain area, being told to be quiet. I could go on and on. But the church should be a place of welcome and rest rather than a place of offense and ableism. So that's why we're here today. And as you can see, number 10 and the top 10 reasons I'm disabled, Amy says your body is a result of the fall. That's theology at work right there. Number 9, God needed a special angel, also theology. 8, you symbolize the worst fate that could happen to any of us at any time. So when Amy says theodicy runs through my veins, that's what she's talking about. Our beliefs about how bad things happen and what they mean, that is what she means, because people tend to react to other folks with disabilities out of their beliefs about how bad things happen, and people often tend to view disability as a bad thing. Number 7, you've given up hope. So in some ways, there's the belief that if you're disabled, embracing that as an identity, whether it's your entire identity or a part of your identity, embracing that is somehow wrong because you're giving up hope. So that's a belief that does pervade the church as well. Number 6, you represent the world's decay. Okay, so there's some beliefs around sin and some beliefs around, again, theodicy that underpin those statements. Number 5, on the more positive note, you keep us grateful, which would seem like a nice thing to say to someone with a disability. But at the same time, there's something called inspiration porn, which is really just as damaging in a lot of ways, where people with disabilities are objectified, not seen as the same as everyone else, with a faith journey and experiences that are just as valid with their positives and negatives, just as anyone else. And so sometimes people with disabilities are kind of called out or put on a pedestal as though it was their job to keep everyone else appreciating how their body is more normal. Instead of embracing that disability is a part of life for all of us. None of us come into this world knowing how to talk, walk, that our abilities are designed by God to change over a lifetime. And so ableism is rife when we forget that. Number 4, you've sinned. Number 3, your parents have sinned. Number 2, Adam and Eve sinned. And altogether, that is reminding us that there's a lot of theology that bad things happen because of sin. And in particular, that God would somehow cause physical and hidden disabilities because of something someone did, that's how God is. So that's obviously theodicy is a question we've wrestled with for eons, and we will continue to wrestle with it. But picking out disability as somehow evidence of a punishment from God is really problematic. And so, again, we are going to try to undermine that thinking and believing with our talk today. And finally, number 1, you just need to have more faith. As though people with disabilities are somehow at fault for the way their bodies and minds work, as though, I shared earlier, as though a blind person could not be a disciple of Jesus, as though all of the healing narratives mean that the normal and right way to be in life and in the world is non-disabled. Which is, again, forgetting that our bodies and minds are designed to change in ability over our lifetimes. And so a lot of this, guys, is bad theology. Common, but bad. Now I want to share some of the reactions shared in the chat. From Lonnie, I hope I'm saying your name correctly. Wow, she's opened my eyes so that I can be more considerate. I know I've been guilty of trying to help while not having been asked, but now I have a granddaughter with Prader-Willi syndrome, and I look at things from a different perspective. Thank you for sharing that, Lonnie. I also have worked with people with Prader-Willi, some of the most faithful people I've worked with, and I would love to connect with you around your experience if that's something that would be interesting to you. We have one of the longest living people with Prader-Willi as part of Sunday Fellowship, and she's amazing. Other things that have been shared, oops. Emily Funk shares, oh, I'm doing this out of order. Let's see. Tom shares, what struck me most was the woman physically blocking Amy from moving away when she was trying to refuse her desire to pray for her healing. Yep. Emily Funk shares, my personal experience with disability. My visible disability is something that affects us all. If we are fortunate to live that long and to old age, my invisible disability has been with me almost all of my life. I'm bipolar and it is inherited and has affected many members of my family. That resulted in my member committing suicide a month before I was married. Wow. That's a lot of pain to deal with. And thank you, Emily, for trusting us with your experience. Tom just shared babies are disabled. That is, I understand what you're saying there, Tom, but I'm not sure. Maybe, I don't know. I guess I have to think about that. Lonnie shares, those PWS people are warriors. PWS, Prader-Willi syndrome, I think is what you're saying. And you're right about that. Sharon Baker shares, I have never experienced what she describes. I'm sure people think those things about me, but no one has ever expressed it out loud. Well, that is interesting. Thank you for sharing that, Sharon. You are the one person that I've met with a physical disability who has not had that experience. So I'm glad that you haven't experienced people kind of making a lot of assumptions about your faith and your needs. So I'm really glad you didn't experience that. All right, so let's move into a little bit of scripture study here. And I'm taking some of this. This is not all material that I have somehow developed in my infinite wisdom. I am taking this from another book, which was written by Bethany McKinney, who is a church leader in the Presbyterian Church. She wrote a book called Healing in the Way of Jesus. Healing Disability in the Way of Jesus. And so I have used this in the past with my own congregation, and I hope it'll be helpful. So what I want us to do now is to think about the models we have in our minds and hearts of disability. And there are many more models of disability than just the two I'm going to talk about today. But I think these are helpful in terms of our reading of Scripture. Because yes, Scripture is filled with healing narratives where it seems like someone with a disability comes to Jesus and then is spiritually and or physically healed. And so it can make it seem as though a person with a disability could never possibly be a disciple of Jesus. But there is much more going on there. And there are ways to read these scriptures that reveal there is not just that meaning to the scripture. There is much more there. And our hearts and minds are widened by becoming aware of our medical model bias. So you are seeing a cartoon, which makes it very clear where someone in a wheelchair is trying to get in, and there's a very ableist sign that says, "Weigh in, everyone welcome." And clearly stairs are not going to work for the person. But the point of this cartoon is that there are two different ways of looking at what the problem is here. In the medical model, which is very common in our area of the world, where there's a high level of medical care, is to look at disability as a medical problem. So in other words, the problem here is the impairment of the body. The impairment and the person's body is the problem. Therefore, the person says, from a medical perspective, her impairment is the problem. They should cure her or give her prosthetics so that this person can use the stairs the same way everyone else. Now, hopefully that's a very obviously ableist way to look at disability and to think about the problem here. Now, there is another way of looking at disability called the social model. And like I said, there are other models, like the financial model is another model of disability. I'm not going to go into that here, but if you're interested in learning more, you can see that I have a photo of Jody Yarborough. And I pulled a lot of this material in this particular slide from her website. She has a great article that talks about at least 4 different models of disability. And her website is going to be in the resources at the end of the presentation today. But the social model is different because it looks at the problem and therefore the solution when looking at disability as coming from outside of the body of the individual with a disability. In other words, the stairs are the problem. They should build a ramp. So what that is saying to you is that the social model of disability is not inherent, but because a body or a mind works differently than someone else, that diversity of bodies and minds is normal, and it is only the society and the conditions of the environment that cause the problem and define disability. So did you catch that? The social model is saying that it is how the society, the environment around a person, determines what disability is. Okay, so what do we do with that? I'm going to read to you Mark 10, 46 to 52. They came to Jericho. As he and his disciples and a large crowd were leaving Jericho, Bartimaeus, son of Timaeus, a blind beggar, was sitting by the roadside. When he heard that it was Jesus of Nazareth, he began to shout out and say, "Jesus, son of David, have mercy on me." Many sternly ordered him to be quiet, but he cried out even more loudly, "Son of David, have mercy on me." Jesus stood still and said, "Call him here." And they called the blind man, saying to him, "Take heart, get up, he is calling you." And so, throwing off his cloak, he sprang up and came to Jesus. And then Jesus said to him, "What do you want me to do for you?" The blind man said to him, "My teacher, let me see again." And Jesus said to him, "Go, your faith has made you well." And immediately he regained his sight and followed him on the way. Now, let's experiment for the moment and look at this scripture, specifically trying to look at it from a medical model. In other words, the problem here, what I want to say is, what is the problem? And what is therefore the solution? Where is the problem located? And you're welcome to type in the chat your answer. Where is the problem? What needs to be healed? Looking at it from a medical point of view, the medical model point of view. So the medical model would say that the problem is that Bartimaeus's eyes don't work. Right. Thank you, Wendy. The vision needs to be healed. That is the problem. Therefore, the solution is for Bartimaeus's eyes to be healed. He needs to be able to see just like everyone else around him. So that is the medical point of view. Now let's try looking at this passage from a social model of disability. What are the problems? What is the problem that needs to be healed in this passage? And where is it located? Feel free to type in the chat your response. So a social model of disability would say that the environment is the problem, that the community, yes, thank you, John, that Bartimaeus is not just isolated because his eyes don't work, but he's isolated because his community has ignored him. He's sitting by himself on the roadside, and he can't get access to Jesus because everyone else is crowding around, and he calls out. And what do the people around him say? They tell him to be quiet. And in a lot of healing narratives, this one is actually better, as Reverend Bethany, Dr. Reverend Bethany Kinney says. This one is better than a lot because Bartimaeus actually has a name in this passage, and he has a voice. He actually advocates for himself. So in a lot of ways, Bartimaeus is healed already. He already is advocating for access for himself. And Jesus actually asks him, "What do you want me to do for you?" So there's a lot that's right about this passage. That's good. And what Jesus does, which is interesting here, is that he calls Bartimaeus to come to him. So he brings him from outside of the community and out of the isolation. So Jesus is not just healing Bartimaeus's eyes, he is bringing him into the community, and he is ignoring the attempts by the community to silence him. So some of the responses in the chat, John and Jill say the community has outcasted Bartimaeus. That is a problem, yes. Joe DeGrande says one of the problems could be that he's a beggar and his poverty needs to be addressed. Yes. Wendy Getto-Lacey shares that Bartimaeus's faith needs to be strong and he's being silenced. So those are problems. I would say his faith in Jesus needs to grow, but his faith is already pretty strong because he's advocating for himself and seeking to be taken seriously, ignoring the people around him. And that takes a lot of faith. Also, Kelly Turney says blindness requires begging because of barriers for blindness to participate in the economy. So yes, these are all additional problems that need to be healed. So it's not just Bartimaeus that needs healing here. It's also the community and the relationships involved. And what I love about this passage is that Jesus asks, like I said, Bartimaeus what he wants, that Bartimaeus has a name and a voice in this passage, which is not always true of the healing narratives. And so that is something to really be aware of when you're reading other healing narratives. Chances are every time we read a healing narrative, there's somebody in the room with a disability. 1 in 4 people are disabled. We really need to put on different glasses, different mindset when we are reading these healing narratives to understand there's so much more going on there than just the healing of someone's vision. There's a lot more being healed. All right. Hopefully this makes sense. And you are going to have a chance to, ask more questions. And I'm hoping that from this conversation, asking yourself, what is the problem here? Where is the location of the problem and what needs to be healed can help you in reading scripture in a less ableist way. All right. So I want to keep moving, and I'm going to make a Methodist joke here. Haha. And I should have made a slide on this, but one of my favorite parts of Amy Kenny's book is where she talks about disability mosquitoes. And I feel like Methodists should appreciate this because of our nothing but nets push. Every Methodist remembers that. And the push to eradicate malaria using mosquito nets and raising money to bring mosquito nets to people all over the world. Because we know as Methodists that even though mosquitoes are small, even though their bites are not fatal every time, we know that mosquitoes kill more people around the world than many, many other things. And so when Amy Kenny, oh, good, somebody has the t-shirt for Nothing But Nets. Good. So when Amy Kenny talks about the language that people use as disability mosquito bites, that, yes, one bite isn't the worst thing in the world, but being bitten over and over and over and over builds up and can really damage people's hearts and minds. And so, asking people to change their language and to learn different ways of expressing themselves and talking about disability is not just, saying that we are the center of the universe and that everyone needs to accommodate every little thing, that we are somehow overly sensitive, but it's actually, inviting the world to be aware of the impact that language has over time to hearts and minds. And, like Jerry said, not every person with a disability has the same experience or the same perspectives on these things. But this is what Amy Kenny shares, is her hope that we could recognize that there is such a thing as expired language. And yes, it takes effort and education to change the ways we talk. And we can do that. If the Pope can change his name and we can call the same person by a new name, we can change and I would make a plug for pronouns in the same way. We can change the way we talk to people and call them by a different name. We can change our pronouns and we can change how we talk about disability. So some examples of expired language are talking about people as though they are defined by their disability. In other words, saying, oh, the handicapped or the disabled. Now, this is, there are exceptions to these things because we talked, as Amy said, she uses identity first language. In other words, she says, I am, I am disabled. That's not the same thing as saying, oh, the disabled. So talking about people and lumping them as though their disability defines them, that's a slightly different thing than someone with a disability claiming I'm disabled as part of their identity. So I hope that's not too nuanced. But expired language, I think it's pretty obvious that the R word is an expired word. We do not need to use that word anymore. People with disabilities experience it as offensive. So is slow or mentally handicapped, deaf and dumb, crazy, insane, psycho, learning disabled or a slow learner, quadriplegic, crippled, invalid, lame, dwarf or midget, wheelchair bound, confined to a wheelchair, or normal healthy children versus disabled children, handicapped parking in restrooms, sickly, dying of Parkinson's or dying of any other disability or illness, suffering from. So some of this needs some explanation, probably if this is unfamiliar territory for you. Talking about lumping children like normal children together might not seem like it's discriminatory, but it is, as though there is such a thing as normal. We can talk about, we can use person first language, which is going to be in my next slide, and this I think will come clearer as we learn about that. But also words like handicapped parking, there are now better ways to talk about that, and I still make this mistake. Accessible parking is a much better way to talk about it because the word handicapped has negative connotations to it. It's as though there's something wrong. There's something bad about having your body move in different ways, or needing some kind of a assistive device to move your body, or needing to park closer. So as much as you can, use the word accessible restrooms, accessible parking. And instead of talking about people who have a disability or an illness as sickly or dying of bipolar disease or bipolar disorder is a better way to say that, or suffering from bipolar disorder or suffering from mental illness, you can say much better things. So let's look at some better ways of talking next. So yes, in the chat, Tom says mosquito bites basically are the same thing as microaggressions. Yes, that's exactly the point, Tom. So here we are talking about a better way to talk. Now, this isn't always true, but it is a better starting point than the expired language we just said. So person first language is a place to start, and then it's always best to get to know people and to ask them what works for them. So in other words, there are some exceptions to person first language. It's at the bottom. I mentioned some of those, like identity first preferences, such as I'm disabled, I'm deaf, I'm autistic, I'm a little person. All right. And yes, Tom made another comment. Handicap parking locates the problem with a person. Accessible locates it with the physical structure. Exactly. Good point. Thanks, Tom. Okay, so how do we use person first language? So instead of using the R word, which most people don't use anymore, instead of saying slow, we can say people with intellectual disabilities. And instead of saying insane people, we can say, or psycho, some of these derogatory, objectifying words, we can say things like people with mental illness. There are people that like to use identity first language who have mental illness, And they will tell you that, especially if you actually show an interest in asking them what they prefer. There is a community that claims madness as an identity. And some people will say, I'm part of the mad community. But person first language is a good place to start. People with a physical disability, not the disabled. Allowing people to have more than one defining characteristic, a person who uses a wheelchair, a person who communicates with their eyes or a device, etc. If you want to talk about children who do not have a disability, you don't have to call them normal or healthy children, as though children who have disabilities could not possibly be healthy or normal. You can say children without disabilities. And like I said earlier, accessible parking in restrooms, and a person living with a medical condition such as chronic illness, any kind of chronic illness, irritable bowel syndrome, instead of suffering from. It's a less derogatory way of talking about very courageous lives that people live. So I'm hoping that this is making sense to people, that we can use person first language and start there until we get to know people enough that we can ask them what they prefer. And and the main thing to say here is that you're going to make mistakes, and it's part of the learning process to make mistakes. And the best thing you can do, the most anti-ableist thing you can do, is to accept and value when someone calls you out. It might not feel good, but it is good. And for someone to trust you enough to tell you what they prefer, it's a sign of trust, and it's a blessing. And I know it doesn't feel good always to be called out, but this is just like anti-racism work. It's part of the air we breathe. It is all something that we have grown up in, and it is a part of our ways of thinking and talking and believing, and we will make mistakes. And so if we accept that from the beginning and approach the moments when we do make a mistake and someone calls us out, or we stop ourselves, just like the story that Jerry shared, and I shared a little bit about my own mistakes, then I think we can have just some humility about this, that this is bigger than just us, and it's not about us. It's not, don't take it personally when someone asks you to change your language or the way you're treating them. That is a sign of trust. And it's also a sign of courage in the person who's saying it. So let's talk a little bit about some disability etiquette, and then we're going to be just about at the end of our talk, and there's going to be a chance for questions. So I see that there's a comment from Emily. I'm going to hold off on it until after this part of the conversation, and I will share it after that. But Tom is making a comment that there's no real need to be defensive, that we're all on a learning journey with this stuff, which is absolutely true. So let's talk about some etiquette. So these are just advice for when you're interacting with someone that you don't know well. Someone whom you know well, there might be somewhat different boundaries here, but this is a starting point for disability etiquette. So don't ever touch someone's equipment or assistance animal without asking. That is like you touched their body. So people with disabilities are capable of doing a lot of things on their own. And usually, like Jerry shared with the woman who wanted to delete her messages, would often prefer to. And unexpected touch is not great for most of us. It can also disrupt people's balance or distract the assistance animals, so just don't do it. Always include people with disabilities in what you're saying and doing. None of us wants to be ignored, right? But sometimes we don't know how to include. So there's always things that we can learn about this, and here is some advice about it. Excuse me, always speak directly to someone with disabilities instead of to their companion. Jerry told me a story about when he went to a restaurant and the waiter asked his wife for his order instead of him, making a lot of assumptions about what Jerry was capable of doing. This kind of stuff happens all the time to people with disabilities. And in that story, Jerry said his wife said, "I have no idea. Why don't you ask him?" And then waiter was able to hear that and then ask Jerry. So always speak directly to people with disabilities. Avoid patronizing or speaking to people in a childish way. Adults with disabilities should always be treated as adults. So this happens a lot in the community that I serve, that people with intellectual disabilities can be infantilized. People can adopt a different tone of voice that's very childish, or speak only to the staff that's with them, if there is a staff person or a family member. Or, speaking in very patronizing ways. "Oh, didn't you do such a great job opening the door?" You know, as though like opening the door is somehow like impressive just because they have, an intellectual disability. "Oh, you did a great job reading that scripture." Like that is a patronizing way to talk to someone with an intellectual disability. You can say, "Nice job," without having to call out that it's unusual that they can read. Um, you can use concrete and direct language and be patient. People with the cognitive disabilities, you can be aware without saying something to them that they might need more time to respond to you or to make a decision if you ask them a question. That is, I understand these things are nuanced, but using concrete language until you know someone better and being patient with them, these are not bad things to do. Oh, yes, Robin says patting wheelchair users on the head is not good. Yes, patting people on the head, don't do that. Treat people who are adults as adults and understand that they're going to do and want to have adult things. There's a lot of discrimination that happens around adults with disabilities, having sexuality and drinking alcohol, making adult choices. And there's a lot of ableism, even in the human services world, when people want to make adult choices as adults. So, just kind of being aware that there are challenges that people with intellectual disabilities deal with left and right because they're not often viewed as real adults. Moving on. Identify yourself when you're greeting someone who's visually impaired and offer to explain where things are and let them know when you leave. That's just, if you think about it, this is just very obvious, but if you don't practice it a lot, then it might be new to you. And so I've seen a lot of people doing great practices today, making sure Jerry knows who is talking to him, not just assuming that he somehow knows by the tone of your voice, which is an assumption that I have made, I think, at times when we've been talking, Jerry. So I know I've made that mistake. But identifying yourself, offering to explain, and accepting if someone says, "No, I know where that is," and letting them know when you leave. And when you're talking to someone with a wheelchair, this was somewhat new to me, and I think somewhat debatable, because just pulling up a chair if you're going to be there for more than a few minutes and kind of speaking on the same level is, I think, a good practice. It's not something I had thought about a lot until I found this particular resource. And I have seen people with a wheelchair say, "Don't try to crouch down and get on my level. I don't need you to do that." I think it's nuanced. And I think, over a long period of time, it does make sense probably to be on the same level as this person that you're talking to. Instead of having them crane their neck for, 35 minutes or 15 minutes to talk to you. Next, ask about and plan for accessibility needs when you're designing community events. Ding, ding, ding. This is important stuff for the church. A lot of us don't have this kind of training. I did not get it in seminary. I definitely didn't get it as a pastor for many years. And it wasn't until I started doing this work that I started to really think about this stuff. Um, a lot of churches have done great stuff, and there are a lot of resources in the United Methodist Church for churches to make progress in being more accessible and inclusive in their practices, especially around worship, how they hold events and meetings, um, things like image descriptions, so that it's not assumed that everyone can see the images that are being projected in a Zoom meeting or on the screen, having resources available like the Bible and the hymnal that Jerry talked about as a child. But it's not just that, it's also making it work for people because he was never going to carry around 26 volumes. Uh, and so there had to be planning. There had to be people willing to provide accommodations and plan for community events to be accessible. And that's a great example of not just having a resource, but planning and thinking about the accessibility needs of the people who are present. Um, just be aware that assistance animals are legally permitted wherever their handlers go. Assistance animals are permitted in church sanctuaries. Um, the ADA, the churches are exempt from the ADA, but most of our denominations have made progress to the point where it is expected. And if a church leader was called out for preventing an assistant animal from entering the sanctuary or the building, I would think that you would run into some problems with that, even though the church is technically exempt from the ADA. Moving on in conversation, starting with person first language, like we just talked about, I won't go into it. But recognizing that there are people that prefer identity first language, such as people who are blind and identify that way. Instead of saying with blindness, they might prefer being said, I'm blind. And finally, when you're interacting with individuals, just ask if there's language they prefer. Start with emphasis on inclusion rather than correct language. The inclusion is really the most important thing, and I think Jerry's story makes it clear that for him what mattered, not the older lady who said, "Hey, blind boy, where are you trying to go?" He wasn't offended by that. He was happy that she was interacting with him and treating him just like she would treat anyone else. That inclusion matters more than the language. And as you get to know people, you learn what's comfortable with them and how to assist them. But if you never interact with them, you will never learn that. So including people is the most important thing. Okay, I've been talking for a while. I'm going to go back to the chat, and then I have one more slide to show you, and then I'm going to stop the share and we will have some questions. But I want to share what Emily typed into the chat. And she says, an unrelated thought. When I was traveling to Alaska last July, we ended up in a bus with a woman in a power chair, as was my husband. We traveled together in the mobility van that Cunard provided to help the disabled be able to get to their cruises. My biggest memory from talking to this woman is when I told her that if someone blamed me for my disability, my reaction is that it is their problem. If I don't let myself be offended, then their comments can't hurt me. She said she was amazed by that because those comments hurt her. I said that it took me a long time to get to that philosophy. And it was like a light turned on in her head. She had become disabled fairly recently and hadn't had the time to adjust. That's a great story, Emily. Thank you. I think a lot of times people who acquire disabilities later in life have a lot of healing to do and a lot of grieving to do. And so, there are wounds. And I think taking the fact that those wounds can exist seriously is the best way to start. I think that the person you're talking about was able to hear what you said. It had carried a lot more weight coming from you than it would have from me. That would have probably been experienced in a very different way if someone who wasn't physically disabled had shared, that if you don't let yourself be offended, then it won't hurt you. I think that would have come across differently, but I don't know. Every person's different. So thank you for sharing that story. Emily Funk also shares, I prepare taxes and I almost immediately make a very dedicated, I almost immediately made a very dedicated client when I went out to pick him up for our appointment and started to approach his assistive dog and then stop myself saying, oh, right, your dog is working now. So again, this is, I think, a great illustration of you, Emily, really accommodating someone for their needs by picking them up, but it also realize, almost having an ableist action in terms of wanting to pet the dog and then realizing and stopping yourself. And so, we all internalize ableism and we all make these mistakes. So that's a great, a great, a great place to end this part of the conversation. And now I'm realizing I actually have a lot more material than I remembered, but it's not going to take long. So what I wanted to say after some of these hard conversations is that the good news is we have a lot of different gifts. We already have resources within our tradition, as much as we have sort of difficult points around healing and our theologies of sin and theodicy. We also have resources in our tradition that help us think differently, such as the idea that we are a community with many members and many gifts, and that each gift came because of the grace that God gave us. And so you're seeing a picture now from Sunday Fellowship, and we are literally receiving scrolls symbolizing the spiritual gifts that God gives us all, regardless of ability or disability. And I want to show you this video that is from a worship service. This is from the group that I lead. We lead worship for the whole church at least once a year. And so I want to just share a couple minutes of this song, which I hope United Methodists appreciate because it's by Mark Miller. And it's called Child of God. And I'm not going to play the whole thing, but take a listen. hope you enjoyed that. I remember this day, but the reason I showed it to you is, in my opinion, this is what we want for churches, to have this kind of all ages, all abilities, welcome and connection and participation. And this is not to say that the church where I work is perfect at this. There was a time where people with disabilities were asked to sit in a certain section, okay? And we've had a disability, a ministry for people with disabilities, which is a separate ministry, which has its own sort of pluses and minuses. We've had that for 40 years, and it's taking, all of this time to build relationships and to change some of our practices and ways of thinking. But what I want to draw your attention to in this video is what practices, worship practices, are here that are inclusive. And you're welcome to chat, type into the chat things that you're noticing. I'm also going to point out some, which is that there are a lot of ways to participate in this particular act of worship. You'll see some people are using streamers because they either don't use words to talk, or they're not readers. And so we provide another way to express what the music is saying, that we're all a part of the community. And yes, Wendy is pointing out dancing and moving our bodies. That's right. We have a level floor, so it is physically accessible to people with mobility challenges who use wheelchairs. We have short people in the front. You never thought about that as an accessibility thing, but it is. And we have people of all different ages and abilities. We have the kind of language in the songs that is easy to say, and accessible to people who are young, who might be beginning readers. We also have, I forgot what I was going to say. Shoot. Well, I think you get the picture. This is kind of what we're aiming for. This kind of, oh, I was going to say repetition in the music, having a song that the tune repeats several times, and I think I can say that it is no less powerful because it's not complicated music. It's beautiful, right? Mark Miller is so talented. But it has some repetitive aspects that make it more accessible for people to sing, no matter what their cognitive ability is or their age is. Okay. So a couple more kind of suggestions in case this is helpful for your community. If you want to start being more inclusive, I would recommend that you start building relationships with people of all abilities, using fun activities, things that everybody enjoys just doing together. So it doesn't really matter, if you don't know each other that well. Everybody loves to go apple picking. Everybody loves to play board games. I love this table on the right, which shows people with different ages, and you can't even tell but there are people who are hard of hearing, people with an intellectual disability sitting at the table with people who are hearing, and people without cognitive disabilities at this table enjoying Candyland together. I also, if you don't have a connection with the human services agencies in your area and you really want to reach out, I think a great idea is to invite people in your community to donate toys and games that they're no longer using. I've found that a lot of group homes don't have much. They have some, but like in the pandemic, when we did this particular drive, people were at home all the time. They weren't getting to their day programs where a lot of these other resources that they would use were. They didn't have puzzles. They didn't have games and art supplies at their group homes. And I've noticed that since the pandemic, the group homes that I serve, there's more of that stuff. But it is so fun to collect all this, that stuff that's not getting used, and to recycle it and make it accessible to people who need it. And it's a wonderful way to form a relationship with a human service agency. I can't imagine them saying no to something like this. So it's a place to start. Another really great thing to do is to teach people about the disability rights movement. In Sunday school, you can see a picture of Sunday school kids learning about that from two people with disabilities. This is something we do a lot, where we participate in something called the Minuteman Arc March. And then we invite people supported by the agency Minuteman Arc to talk to kids about what Minuteman Arc does. And that invites them to ask questions. And we also use All Saints Day, which is coming right up, to teach Sunday school kids and adults about the disability rights movement and the saints of the disability rights movement. So you're looking at a mural that we made a few years ago, which on the mural, it contains images of famous disability rights activists and people in our own community who have died, and recognizing that these are all disability saints among us. And it's just a way to teach and learn about disability and the incredible disability rights movement, and just start a conversation. You can also experiment with more inclusive worship practices. You can see a picture here of us doing a movement-based call to worship where we use our body to express what we're saying, which is how much does Jesus love us? Does Jesus love us this much? And we change the position of our fingers from our small inch with our fingers to hands this much apart, and we keep repeating the same words. Repetition is also an inclusive practice until we get to the point of how much does Jesus love us, and we put our hands all the way out and we say this much and much more after every time we ask the question. So that's an example of an inclusive call to worship. Another example is this order of service on the right, which uses what's called picture exchange communication system images to help someone know what's happening and what to expect next, even if they're not a reader. So that's another method of inclusive communication and worship practices. We have, in the congregation where I work, we have orders of service that people can take to their seat with these things. And finally, realize that everyone can preach and teach. You're seeing pictures of some beloved people in the ministry where I work, neither of whom use a lot of words to talk. And it is unnecessary for them to be able to preach and teach. Sharita on the left is one of the best teachers about communion that I know. When she is present, she makes it clear that she wants to be included and served. And just those actions let us know how important it is to be part and have access to the communion table. And I promise you that is a sermon that is short and sweet and very, very clear. Better than a lot of sermons I've heard. And on the right, that's Charles. Charles does have some words. Usually he raises his hand to pray, asking for prayer for his mama, his papa, his grandma, and his grandpa. That's about the extent, and babies. He loves babies and talks about them. But his prayer practice is a sermon in itself. And I could also talk about his way of teaching about baptism. He always shakes hands with someone who gets baptized. He gets up from his seat and shakes hands with them. And I promise you, everyone gets the message about baptism when he does that. Okay. I know we have about 10 minutes left. Here you're just seeing a slide of the resources within the United Methodist Church for some of the work that we need to do in the church. Things like an accessibility audit. There are resources on the Conference Committee on Disability, but there's also the the National United Methodist Church has a great website, and that's who has this brochure I'm showing you images of. There is the badge program, which is how once you complete an accessibility audit, your sort of accessibility is graded according to bronze, copper, bronze, silver, and gold. And I know that the Greenwich United Methodist Church has the gold badge and has worked really hard and yet is still always making changes. And each denomination, many of them have versions of this process. So it's a good thing to do. Other things you can do are have a Disability Awareness Sunday. And I had the privilege of being with Emily at her church, Leominster United Methodist Church, this summer when we did a Disability Awareness Sunday. And there are lots of resources for this stuff on these websites. And I want you to know that I'm a resource for you, and the committee is a resource for you. I bet Jerry and I would love to visit you if you would like a preacher, if you would like a class. You could talk to us. We could talk to the disability committee and try to figure that out. So we are resources as well. And with that, I'm going to stop the share and invite questions before we end for today. Are there any questions of Jerry or me? Or responses are also welcome. I don't know why my hand is up. That's weird. Okay, lowered that. And I'm going to remove Jerry's spotlight so we're all kind of the same size if you're viewing the screen. And I am going to invite you all to unmute yourself and just ask your question verbally. Or share your response.
Go ahead.
If you wave your hand, then I can call on people individually so we don't talk over each other. Joe, yes.
Instead of a question, I just want to make a comment how much I appreciated this this learning experience and how much we take as we've been grown up and as we've conditioned to speak, how more sensitive we have to be in things that to be inclusionary. So I wanted to thank you for the time. I really appreciated this.
And I want to say that as a person with a disability, I want to say that Melissa did a fantastic job on this presentation. This was really good.
Yeah.
Thank you.
I'd like to offer our welcome and acknowledge that you and Jerry did a fantastic job. Jerry, this was John Bitko. So you're welcome to come and visit our church anytime, and we'll certainly make time for you.
Thanks, John. Emily.
One of the things that I wrote down during this, we should all learn from being able to observe the freeness of some disabled people who are willing to reach out, whereas other New Englanders are so reticent and standoffish.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, learning from the disabled and seeing the gifts that disabled give us is a very important lesson and a way to combat ableism.
Amen.
Amen.
Sharon.
Hi, I'm actually in Indiana. I'm a member of the New England Conference, but I moved back home once I went on medical leave. And I will say that I find it, sort of backing on what Emily said, I find it very interesting that I get one of two responses or reactions when I'm out and about, whether it's at a sporting event or the grocery store or whatever it might be. It's either everyone wants to help me, whether I need help or not, or I'm pretty much ignored. And there's really not a lot of in between, which I find it's very interesting. And I don't know what social commentary that would bring up, but I find one or the other. And sometimes I've always been very, very, very independent and stubborn and all of that. And it's only been 2 years since my amputation. And being in a wheelchair, I was not able to use a prosthetic leg, so I am in a chair. And it took a period. It took me a while to get used to it. And like you, Melissa, you mentioned, Melissa, there was a grieving period. And I'm lucky to be involved in a church where I am embraced, I am involved, I'm involved in worship. I have a wonderful pastor who invites me into worship. And I feel very welcome and very included. And I don't think people see me as disabled, if that makes any sense. I just sort of who I am, but that's rare. That's where most places, I kind of stand out, and people react in very strange ways. But I think just the knowledge, and I'm a part of this because I'm developing a class for my church on disability advocacy and awareness. So this has been very helpful, and I very much appreciate it.
Thank you for sharing that, and you're welcome. And Jerry, you have your hand up.
I just want to tell a real quick little story here that is about using adult language when speaking of adults. I was at the Seattle Aquarium with my wife one time, and a woman working there came over to me and said, "Oh, we have a blind person who volunteers. She comes with her family and she volunteers here often." And then later on, she came over to me and said, "Oh, here she is now, Katie. Come on over here. I want you to meet this man." And I just assumed that it was a child. And I said, "Well, hello, Katie. How old are you?" And she said, "I'm 40. I'll just end with that.
Oh, yes, yes. Speak to adults like adults, regardless of ability. And I do want to say, Robin, I know I missed saying that you're part of the disability committee. So, Robin, if you want to wave, thank you for being here, Robin. Um, are there any other responses or questions?
I will say, I'm sorry, I saw Wendy's hand.
Yeah, let's hold off, Sharon. I'm going to give Wendy a chance.
So this has been quite enlightening, and thank you both, Jerry and Melissa, for putting this on and for all the resources that you educated about us about where their things are in the United Methodist, especially in the United Methodist websites, those kinds of things. Now, I'm an occupational therapist who've been working for 30 plus years with folks with all sorts of different abilities, and some of them are caused by surgeries or illnesses that they may have that will help them to. They might improve from them. Some of them are folks that have things that have been from birth, and so this has been enlightening, and in many ways, as far as the language that I might use in the future. And I think it's something that all of us, including folks that are in all works of life, medical, social, all works of life, need to be considering and searching oneself for how I am using and being an ableist without even knowing it. So being participating in something like this has been really enlightening. Even though I knew a lot of it, still reinforcing that, bringing it out, helping me to check myself. And I know I'll make still mistakes. I'm sure I've made mistakes in the past, and I appreciate just having this resource for each of us. So thanks very much.
You're so welcome, Wendy. Thank you so much for coming. And I know, Sharon, you want to say something. What did you want to say?
I just wanted to say that it was a couple of years ago when I was still living in New England. I wanted to attend a two or 3 day retreat on the Cape. I think it was in Wellfleet, and the site that was chosen had steps and no ramp, so it was not wheelchair or in any sort of. At that point, my knee was a mess, and I was having trouble getting around. I needed a walker. Steps were hard. I couldn't go to the event, and it was a New England Conference sponsored event.
Yep. Yeah, I think there's a lot of growing that our conference and our wider denomination and all denominations can do. That's part of why we have the committee. And guess what? Now that you attended this, um, you have become evangelists for this work. I do feel a little bit like I'm preaching to the choir today. We had 35 people registered, 16 arrived, and then they'll get the recording and you will get the slides, which I'm realizing you never got the resource slide to look at, which I think it's probably more helpful if you actually get it as a slide deck and then you can actually read it or click on the links. Um, but you're preaching to the choir here, or I am preaching to the choir, and Jerry's preaching to the choir. And it's annoying, that that's the case so often. That this isn't the kind of priority, this doesn't have the priority that should in our world and in our churches, and we got work to do. And we're now a part of that work, and what an honor it is to be part of it. And it sucks that sometimes we, as many people who experience disability personally, have to be the educators. And ain't that the way?
I just wanted to share that that after this was announced, there was also another event, as you may well be aware, Melissa, that was actually required of pastors, and so I decided I was going to disobey that.
Love it.
that rule. So perhaps part of the reason that some signed up initially and then didn't make it, but just as just to share that was something that was going on. And yeah, I was disappointed that that they weren't able to accommodate what was first on the calendar.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But in any event,
Yeah, I will bring
I'm-
that up. I will bring that up at our next disability committee meeting. And I think we will pass that on to leadership. We have a district superintendent, Arlene Tully, and Wee Chang, I think is part of our group too. So they will hear that. Any other responses? It's 12:03 and I'm wanting to end. So Robin, I'll take your comment. I do want to mention that Emily asked if we were going to look at the answers from the quiz at the beginning, which we were not going to do. It's really about your own awareness. So we're not going to look at those answers. And Kelly is saying, oh no, Tom, there is some place I'm required to be. Is there, having read and enjoyed Kenny's book, I signed up for this. Okay, Kelly, well, we won't tell. Oops, darn. Sorry, not sorry. Yeah.
So Melissa,
And also, I know Robin was waiting to say something.
Yep. Oh, I was just going to add that in many of our churches, this is like maybe a little subtle ableism, but it falls on my ear differently as a wheelchair user. Many of my own included congregations, there are parts where we stand to sing, and the leader will say, oftentimes will say, please stand and sing, or please stand and do this, or please, and will say, if you are able. And that falls on my ear personally differently. I don't get all hung up in it. It's not a big deal. I know it's not intended maliciously, but it is a form of exclusionatory language. To me, it says, well, I'm not able, so that leaves me out. Technically, if you really think about it, but in any case.
And practice. It's also it's an exclusionary practice.
Right. Yes.
And yes, absolutely. I think there are things we can do better, like, rise in body or spirit, or body and spirit, or, you can say things like that, or you could all just sit. So in our congregation, we stand for the first song and the last song, but we sit for the middle songs. And sometimes I just don't stand, because I'm sitting with someone who isn't going to stand and I want to hang with them. So I don't stand. Make it an option. Somebody else wanted to say something, because then we really need to stop.
I did want to say something quickly, Melissa.
Yeah.
You were talking about how we reach people who aren't the choir.
Yeah.
And that's one of the things that I tried to do in the book study I started to do at LUMC, that we have a regular book study. Somebody else usually runs it. Right after I started reading Julie Kenny's book, I said, this is something the church should hear. So I asked if I could take a session of the book study, and I had many people coming who weren't disabled. And they really appreciated hearing the things that were in the book. And at one point they said, could we do this more regularly? And it'll get old if we do that. But I'm thinking if you do an annual book study on a book that talks to people about disabilities, you will get people who are ableist and need to hear.
Absolutely. And it's Emily's church that had many of these copies of Kenny's book that I'm giving away to people. So thank you to Emily and her church for funding that. I did get some through, oh gosh, another organization. I think I got 6 copies from them also. It was just something, I think it was the Evangelical Brethren Church that had, when the book came out, they had offered that anybody who approached them and was going to do a study, that they would give them a few copies if they asked. And so they did. So that was nice. So yay. So thank you all for coming today. I hope you enjoyed it. I hope you learned something, and I hope you have a great rest of your weekend. And thanks, Jerry, for all your work with me and your sharing of your story, and everyone being so willing to share today.
Yeah.
Blessings.